Right. I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of the organizing group and again thank both Joe and Jake for being here with us tonight and taking the time to put together such excellent presentations. And for the next 30 minutes or so, or 15 minutes, however long it takes, we're going to go ahead and do a Q&A session. So I'm thinking the best way to do this, we have a pretty small group of people, is to have, if you have a question for either Jake or Joe, or both Jake and Joe, raise your hand and then just state who your question is for. If you'd like them both to answer it, that's fine, and we'll have them go ahead and answer your question. So, anybody have any questions?
Yeah, this is intended for Jake, but Joe, you can chime in too if you'd like. You talked about restoring honest money. Do you think it would be effective for an individual state to propose legislation to do that? How would they do that? What method would they go through? And what result do you think that would have?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I would say that in a lot of ways that might be the first thing, or that might be a better way of doing things. Like if a state has enough legislators that are for that, it would be a faster way of going about it than the federal government. Because one of the things I stressed in my presentation from last year is that the only way the federal government's ever even going to consider things is when we go into a dollar crisis, and at that point it's going to be kind of too late to do a lot of things. And I think that there is, if you're familiar with Dr. Edwin Vieira, there's already some model legislation that's been out, I believe in New Hampshire, that models this, and the whole idea is, again, for the, instead of because again, under the federal constitution, the states are not allowed to emit bills of credit, but they are allowed to, use gold and silver. So it would be constitutional in order to do so. And they haven't changed the Constitution, the federal Constitution. So legally, there shouldn't be too much opposition from the federal government, although in reality there would be. So I would suggest, taking a look at that, those bills that are out there. Probably just by Googling them, I could come up with some of the draft legislation that they have. But it would probably be in some type of, the way it would probably work is there would be some type of market parity. So if gold's traded at whatever, that would be exchange rate for the Federal Reserve notes. And that's more or less probably how it would work.
Yeah, just really quickly, one thing that you might want to look at, most of the time when people start minting money or they start exchanging bills or anything, the government comes in, arrests everybody, and shuts them down. It happens pretty quickly. But one of the things that is happening in Ithaca, New York, do yourself a favor and Google Ithaca hours, because they have something going on there right now where people are allowed to exchange these $10 notes, which are delineations of time. And this is actually being successful, and the government, for some reason, doesn't seem to mind it yet. So if I do work for you, we can create this concept of an Ithaca hour where you pay me in Ithaca hours. Now anybody who accepts them in the greater Ithaca area can trade them. So there is there's always movement, I guess, from individuals who are outside of government to try to take the money supply back, whether it's at a single state level or it's a group level. But there may be ways that we can start this stuff on our own, hopefully without getting arrested in the process, to push us toward that.
Yeah, I'd like to actually add on that. Is there anyone in the room that's heard of Del Valley Silver?
Yeah.
All right, we got one person. I guess I'll share a little bit about Del Valley Silver, because your question was pretty much on the state level. But really, Del Valley Silver, I believe the website is delvalleysilver.com. They're selling silver coins or medallions or what have you in like 1 ounce, half ounce, and I believe quarter ounce denominations. And under the current rules, like there is legal tender laws that force vendors to accept dollars, but vendors can also accept anything else. And for instance, like during the Great Depression, I think ours is probably a good example of this. During the first Great Depression, there was about 3,000 local currencies. Most of these were script currencies. Some of them were based on metal, or it was copper or silver, what have you. But what Del Valley Silver is, you can purchase these, or you can use any type of silver coin. And if the vendor, what Del Valley Silver is doing is they're working on building a merchant network in roughly the Philadelphia area. And what these merchants agree to do is they will accept these coins. When they accept the coins, they have to fill out a 1099 IRS form to make it perfectly legal. And again, they have to also accept dollars at the time. But this is something that would certainly also work, and would be something that instead of having to wait for enough legislators in the Pennsylvania State House to take a look at things, it would be something that people can do immediately. And it does take a lot of work though, but Karen Emery is the CEO of Del Valley Silver. You can easily look her up on either Facebook or that website that I mentioned.
Thank you.
Yeah. And you could start your own company too.
Dave?
Yeah, to add on to that, I think there's one silver mining state out west. I don't want to say which one and be wrong, but I believe their treasurer was directing, the minting of coins as a, to celebrate their silver mining industry. But they were also going to direct the state tax collectors to accept these coins as payment. And so I think accepting coins as payment and tax is a pretty important, step along the way. That wasn't really my question. I was going to ask if you guys have any thoughts on the state-owned banks. I believe one of the Dakotas has a state bank that wasn't in the derivatives and just it's more a utilitarian function of clearing transactions and so forth. Do you guys have any thoughts on those kind of organizations?
Well, the whole thing is like I'm not completely familiar with that particular bank, but the problem is what these banks will end up facing is a lot of unfair competition, because right now if a bank tries, and again is operating in dollars, is trying to compete against these other banks like JP Morgan and Bank of America, they're going to kind of get blown out of the water unless they fully loan out and money print pretty much like the entire banking system is currently doing. But in terms of state sovereignty, absolutely. I mean, things can move back that way. America really has, if you look through the 1800s and really into the 1700s, has a very large history with state banks. And there's even you can look up the Lakota Bank, which is on an Indian reservation, and they've actually tried to go to silver. So obviously there is a cartel that's set up that is the purpose of the Federal Reserve. A lot of times what I tell people is the Federal Reserve, it's kind of like that movie, The Lord of the Rings. You have, the one ring to bind them all, and, in the darkness. One ring to rule them all, and then the darkness bind them. That's pretty much how the Fed works. Those types of banks would obviously be non-member banks, and, I'm not sure if they would be able to outcompete them. Obviously, the Fed would not be willing to bail them out, and they would probably be attacked, but hey, why not? And like you said, I think that the example that you brought up in South and North Dakota would probably be worth looking a bit more into.
Yeah, I think they weathered the storm very well. They're a pretty healthy bank.
Yeah, and the thing is, the system by its very nature is it's insolvent because it doesn't have. It tells you you can withdraw money, but and if you ever notice, whenever bank robbers go in to rob a bank, you notice they only get away with $2,000 or $3,000 with the paper slips. The reason is the banks really don't own, actually hold a lot of the paper receipts for it. A lot of the money is kept in the form of electrons as well.
So I mean, just to add to Jake's statement, I don't have a lot to say. The issue is really competition here. As long as a bank is issuing U.S. currency, they're not going to be able to compete with the other banks because they own the money. I think the only real way, and this is my opinion, but the only real way to get back to a sound money supply is to have a bank operate with some other type of currency. Because I think in the long run, Jake's right, that they get overrun by the competitive nature of the member banks and the Fed.
Cartels don't like competition.
Okay. Do we have any other? Go ahead.
Jake, I think you pointed out some ideas for ways to change the system. One of those was the legal tender law. We need to abolish that, because right now, if somebody offers you $100 and says, this is a payment for your debts, and he gives you this piece of paper, you are required to accept it in return for that $100. But there was a period in the Civil War when the United States was putting greenbacks. California and other states enforced specific performance clauses. But you write a contract that would say $100 payable in gold, which meant 5 of these suckers, 5 ounces of gold. And nobody can give you paper and say, well, that's just as good, because the contract specifically said payable April. And what the Fed did in 33, I think it was, is they actually made gold clauses illegal. That's what the legal tender law means. You no longer can say, well, I insist on gold, I insist on silver. You gotta take that paper, baby. And that's why it's hard for forms of money that get trashed.
Right, and I guess it's not too much of a question, but like, you know, under the current law, like if I trade you, let's say I give you my watch for your hat, technically, we're supposed to fill out this stupid IRS form to document the transaction between our two individuals.
Right.
But, and you're correct about the vendor, but you have to realize when you really get into it, and that's why the article that I had, or the speech that I gave was a bit detailed, but I recommend looking at it because all these things that, like for instance, the movie that they'll be watching is directly on the income tax. All these things are intricately related, and they've kind of been building up this house of cards for quite some time. And you know, certainly within our lifetimes, we're going to see that change. Like the dollar 5 years from now is probably not going to be the same way that it was. You know, Joe had mentioned how the international community is rejecting, or starting to reject the dollar. Instead of using, like for instance, China and Russia, or instead of using the dollar as the trade medium, is now moving to using their own currencies. And the U.S. is now more and more becoming, you know, kind of like an international pariah. But it's going to take a lot of time because, again, the use of the dollar is very widespread. And a lot of, and again, just also how things are so related. When you go to our military, like we have 760 military bases in 150 of the world's 194 countries. And you know, like the Roman Empire, like the Romans would, you know, take over an area and then they would pay back and tax them like crazy. And they would get tribute. The tribute would go to Rome, and you know, they'd be all fat and happy. We don't do that. We pay for more or less these bases, where we pay rent to these countries. And you have to actually ask yourself, you know, what is the benefit of doing this? Like the taxpayer is paying for it. And really, the only benefit that I can come up with, and the truth is truly that you have dollar hegemony. Like you have the dollar, we're forcing that upon the world, and if we have the military bases everywhere, then in the world's strongest military, we spend more on our military than the rest of the world combined, maybe nobody will mess with us. And unfortunately, eventually our troops are going to come home. The way it looks right now is they're going to come home after, you know, the dollar collapses and we literally can't afford it anymore.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
I think in your lecture you made one of the, what I think is one of the, probably the biggest problem with that. That is, the Fed has decision makers, and they make decisions in uncertainty, and a lot of times they guess wrong. Then we have a whole section of the economy devoted to second guessing the Fed, and they both guess wrong about what reality is like and what the Fed is going to do. And our price signals get all distorted. And this has tremendous economic costs when, you know, to the people out there actually